The sun hung low in the sky as the late afternoon breeze swept across the quiet gas station on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The place wasn't too busy. Just a few cars parked near the pumps, their owners focused on filling up or grabbing a quick snack from the small convenience store. The sound of distant traffic hummed in the background, blending with the occasional beeping of gas pumps. Then the peaceful atmosphere was shattered. The deep roar of motorcycle engines echoed down the road as a group of bikers approached, their bikes gleaming under the golden sunlight. There were 5 of them, all dressed in leather jackets, boots, and bandanas. They pulled into the gas station, laughing loudly and talking over one another. Their arrival turned heads, some out of curiosity, others out of caution. They weren't necessarily looking for trouble, but they carried themselves with a confidence that made them seem like they owned the place. Near one of the pumps, an older woman stood beside a sleek black car. She was elegant, dressed in a stylish outfit with large sunglasses covering her eyes. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she moved with grace as she pumped gas into her car. Despite her calm presence, she didn't seem out of place, just another customer stopping for fuel like everyone else. The bikers, still joking amongst themselves, noticed her. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard, nudged his friend and pointed in her direction. They exchanged amused looks before making their way toward her. She didn't seem to notice them at first, too focused on finishing up at the pump. But as their footsteps grew closer, she sensed their presence. "Nice car," one of them remarked, leaning slightly against the pump beside her. His voice was casual, but there was something in his tone that felt off, like he wasn't just making conversation. The woman glanced at him briefly, nodded politely, and went back to what she was doing. Another biker chuckled. "Yeah, real fancy. What brings you out here all alone?" She remained calm, giving a small polite smile before replying. "Just passing through." Her voice was steady, confident, not at all nervous. The bikers exchanged looks again. They had expected a different reaction, maybe nervous laughter or a hurried answer. But she didn't seem fazed. That made them more curious. One of them took a step closer, resting a hand on his hip. "You don't say much, huh?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. His tone wasn't aggressive, but there was an edge to it, as if he was testing the waters. The woman didn't react immediately. Instead, she finished at the pump, placed the nozzle back in its place, and calmly closed the gas cap. Then she turned to face them, her sunglasses still hiding her eyes. "I say what's necessary," she replied, her voice smooth but firm. The bikers were momentarily silent, caught off guard by her cool composure. They had approached her thinking she was just another passerby, someone they could joke with or maybe fluster a little. But there was something about her that made them hesitate. She wasn't scared, and she wasn't interested in playing along. The atmosphere shifted slightly, but the bikers weren't done yet. One of them smirked, deciding to push just a little more. What they didn't know, however, was that they had chosen the wrong person to mess with. And soon, they would find out exactly why. The bikers, now feeling a little more confident, exchanged a few quiet words among themselves. They could tell that the woman wasn't someone who was easily rattled, but that only made them more intrigued. Maybe they could push her just a little more, see how far they could go without making her too upset. One of them, the tallest of the group, stepped forward and gave a teasing smile. He leaned against a nearby pump, folding his arms in a way that looked casual but was meant to take up more space. "You're not worried about being out here all alone?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. His voice was smooth, but there was a slight edge of challenge in it. The woman didn't flinch. She simply finished closing the gas cap of her car and stood up straight, her posture as graceful as ever. "I'm not alone," she said calmly. "I've got my car." Her voice wasn't sharp or rude, just matter of fact. She wasn't interested in engaging with them more than she had to, and her tone made that clear. The bikers didn't seem to mind. They exchanged smirks, thinking this was just part of the fun. Another one of them, a man with a long ponytail, added with a laugh, "You sure have a lot of attitude for someone getting gas in the middle of nowhere." At this, the woman finally turned her head toward them, still wearing her sunglasses. "And you have a lot of time on your hands to make jokes with a stranger," she said, her voice even but with a hint of amusement behind the words. The bikers were quiet for a moment, surprised by her response. They had expected to get a rise out of her, maybe a little laughter or some awkwardness. But instead, she had played along in her own way, not bothered by their teasing, but also not backing down. The leader of the group, the one with the thick beard, decided to try a different approach. He stepped up beside her, trying to get a closer look at her car. "This is a nice ride you've got here. Must be nice to have money for something like this," he said, as if trying to pry more into her personal life. The woman remained composed, not letting his comment get to her. She could tell what he was doing. He was trying to provoke her, see if he could get a reaction. Instead of responding to him directly, she simply smiled, giving him a polite nod. "Everyone has their reasons for the cars they drive," she said, as though this was the most ordinary conversation. The bikers were growing more and more curious. They couldn't quite understand why she wasn't reacting the way most people would. Most people they encountered in places like this would either laugh nervously or quickly get defensive, but not her. She was different, calm and confident in a way they hadn't expected. At this point, it was clear they weren't getting the kind of reaction they were used to. The bikers looked at each other, trying to decide whether to back off or continue with their teasing. But before they could make up their minds, there was a slight shift in the air, something unspoken that made them pause. The moment felt like it was hanging in the balance, and it was clear that whatever happened next, it wouldn't be like anything they had experienced before. As the bikers hesitated, unsure whether to push further, a small movement caught the attention of those around them. From the corner of the parking lot, a figure quietly observed the scene. It was a man, sitting on a motorcycle of his own, his helmet resting on his knees. His body language was relaxed, but there was something about the way he sat that made it clear he wasn't just another bystander. This man, with a calm and composed demeanor, watched the group of bikers and the woman with interest. While the bikers were busy trying to figure out how to get a rise out of the woman, he seemed to be studying the situation. There was no doubt that he had noticed the uncomfortable tension that was building between the bikers and the woman. He had been quietly waiting, giving them space, but now it seemed that he had decided it was time to make his move. He slowly pulled his helmet off, shaking his hair loose as he did. The sunlight caught his face for the first time, revealing a sharp jawline and a familiar, handsome face that looked more relaxed than you'd expect from someone who had been sitting in such a tense situation. The people nearby, including the bikers, began to notice him. His features were striking enough that they couldn't help but do a double take. It wasn't long before someone spoke up, a quiet whisper passing through the crowd. Is that Keanu Reeves?" Someone murmured, the words barely escaping their lips. The bikers, still not fully aware of the man's identity, exchanged puzzled glances. They had heard the name before, of course. Keanu Reeves was a famous actor, someone whose face had been on the big screen for years. But they had never expected to see him in a place like this, sitting casually at a gas station. One of the bikers squinted, trying to make out the man's face better. "Nah, can't be him," he muttered, though there was a hint of doubt in his voice. Another biker, who had been watching more closely, suddenly went pale. "Wait a minute. It is him. That's Keanu Reeves," he exclaimed, his voice cracking with surprise. At this, the rest of the bikers looked more carefully. They now recognized him for sure. The same man who had starred in films like The Matrix and John Wick. The realization hit them all at once, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to pause. The leader of the group, the one who had been teasing the woman earlier, took a step back, his face going from smug to shocked in an instant. He hadn't expected to encounter a celebrity, let alone someone as famous and beloved as Keanu Reeves. And yet, here he was, standing just a few feet away, looking calm and unbothered. Keanu didn't seem fazed by the attention. He glanced over at the group of bikers, his gaze steady but unruffled. Without saying a word, he walked toward them, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. The bikers, realizing they were no longer the center of attention, instinctively stepped aside, their faces now filled with uncertainty. As he got closer, Keanu gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in the direction of the woman. There was no mistaking the subtle message in his eyes. He was there for her, and that was all that mattered. The bikers, still processing the shock of seeing him, couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. Something about Keanu's presence made them uneasy. They had been so sure of their dominance just moments before, but now, with the actor standing nearby, they felt a sense of humility they hadn't expected. It was clear that whatever happened next, the situation was about to take a turn. The moment Keanu Reeves' face was revealed, the mood at the gas station shifted dramatically. The bikers, still stunned by the realization of who they were looking at, could barely form words. Their eyes widened as they took in the famous actor, standing in front of them, effortlessly exuding the cool, calm presence that he was known for. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Keanu's gaze swept across the group of bikers. His expression was calm, almost neutral, but there was no mistaking the power of his presence. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. It was clear that the bikers were now on the defensive, unsure of how to handle the situation. Their confident posturing from moments earlier had all but evaporated. One of the bikers, the one with the ponytail, was the first to speak, but his voice lacked its earlier bravado. "Oh, we didn't know," he stammered, his words coming out much quieter than before. He looked down at the ground as if suddenly unsure of where to look. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He took a small step forward, still composed and unhurried. The bikers, sensing the change in the air, instinctively backed away slightly, giving him more space. There was no aggression in Keanu's body language, but there was a clear authority in the way he carried himself. The leader of the group, the one who had been making jokes earlier, finally managed to find his voice. "We didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, his voice lower than usual. "Just having some fun." His words seemed hollow now, as if the weight of the situation had caught up with him. Keanu paused for a moment before speaking, his voice calm but firm. "I'm sure you didn't," he said, his tone gentle but carrying an underlying seriousness. "But there's a line between fun and respect, and you crossed it." The bikers exchanged uncomfortable glances, and for the first time, they looked genuinely apologetic. They had been so caught up in their teasing and mischief that they hadn't thought about how it might affect the woman they had been bothering. Now, with Keanu standing in front of them, they realized just how far they had overstepped. Keanu turned to the woman who had been the target of their remarks. She was standing quietly, her expression calm but knowing. Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft and caring. She smiled back, nodding gracefully. "I'm fine," she said simply, her calmness seeming to settle the entire situation. Turning his attention back to the bikers, Keanu spoke again, this time with a hint of a smile, but his words still carried weight. "It's always a good idea to remember that you never know who you're talking to. Everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are." The bikers, clearly embarrassed, nodded in agreement, their earlier confidence now replaced with humility. It was clear that Keanu's words had struck a chord with them. Keanu didn't wait for further apology or excuses. Instead, he gave the bikers a simple, understanding look before turning back toward his mother, who was still by the car, quietly watching the entire scene unfold. "Let's go," Keanu said to her, his voice light, as though the whole situation had been a small interruption in their day. Without another word, they both headed toward the car, leaving the bikers behind. The group stood still for a few more seconds, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. The lesson had been made clear, without the need for anger or harsh words. As Keanu and his mother drove off, The bikers remained where they were, their earlier tension slowly dissolving. They had learned something that day, something they wouldn't soon forget. Respect wasn't something that could be taken lightly, and you never knew when you might be standing in front of someone who deserved far more than they had given. As Keanu and his mother drove away from the gas station, the bikers remained frozen in place, each of them processing what had just happened. The atmosphere that had once been filled with loud laughter and joking now felt awkward and still. The group stood together, their bikes parked in the same spots, but their minds were clearly elsewhere. It wasn't long before someone spoke, the silence hanging in the air feeling heavier than it had ever been before. One of the bikers, a young man with a leather jacket, ran his fingers through his hair and sighed. "Man, I can't believe we just did that," he muttered, shaking his head. He was visibly uncomfortable, the realization that they had crossed a line slowly sinking in. The others nodded, all too aware of how much they had messed up. They had been so focused on having fun at someone else's expense that they hadn't stopped to think about who they were really dealing with. The fact that it had turned out to be Keanu Reeves' mother made it even worse. They hadn't just made a mistake, they'd made a huge one. "We were out of line," said the one with the ponytail, his voice now full of regret. "I mean, seriously, that was Keanu's mom. What the heck were we thinking?" He kicked at the dirt on the ground, his earlier cocky attitude completely gone. The leader of the group, the man with the thick beard, let out a heavy sigh, his face reflecting how bad he felt. "You don't just mess with people like that," he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Especially not someone like Keanu, and certainly not his mom." They all stood there for a few moments, the weight of the situation sinking in. Each of them had felt the discomfort of being caught in their own mistake. They weren't just feeling embarrassed because they had annoyed a woman at a gas station. They were feeling guilty for having treated someone with disrespect when they didn't deserve it. And now they had to face the fact that their actions had been noticed by someone who could easily call them out. The sound of motorcycle engines roaring to life broke the quiet pause. But instead of the usual loud, carefree noise, this time it was quieter, less confident. They weren't in a rush to leave, but they needed to break the silence. The leader of the group swung his leg over his bike, starting the engine, his thoughts racing. "I'm just glad Keanu didn't get mad," he said, still shaken. "It could have been worse." "Yeah," the young man with the leather jacket replied. "But still, it doesn't matter if it was Keanu or anyone else. We shouldn't have acted like that. No one deserves to be treated like that." He shook his head again. "We should have been better." Another biker, who had stayed quiet through most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Maybe it's a good thing that we learned this lesson the easy way. I mean, imagine if someone else had stepped in instead of Keanu. It could have been worse." There was a thoughtful silence after that. No one spoke for a while, each biker lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on how they had behaved. It was a lesson that would stick with them long after they left the gas station. They realized that it wasn't just about respecting celebrities. It was about showing basic respect for everyone, regardless of who they were. As the group started their bikes and prepared to leave, the leader looked back one last time at the gas station, his mind still heavy with what had just unfolded. "We messed up today, but let's make sure we don't mess up again," he said quietly. The others nodded in agreement, their earlier cockiness replaced with a sense of humility. They were no longer the same group that had rolled in confidently, ready to pick on someone just to pass the time. They had learned something important, and it was clear that it was going to shape the way they acted from now on. As the bikers rode off into the sunset, their conversation was quieter, more reflective than it had been when they first arrived. They hadn't just learned about respect. They had learned that sometimes it takes a simple moment, a simple gesture, to change how you see the world around you. And that lesson would stay with them long after they had left the gas station behind. As Keanu and his mother made their way down the road, the peaceful atmosphere in the car stood in sharp contrast to the tension that had just unfolded at the gas station. Keanu drove with his usual calm focus, his hand steady on the wheel, while his mother sat beside him, still wearing the same composed expression. Neither of them spoke immediately. The quiet was comfortable, almost like a moment of reflection after what had just happened. They both knew what had occurred: the bikers' teasing, the uncomfortable situation, and the way it had all turned around. But neither of them seemed to dwell on it for too long. Keanu glanced over at his mother, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You okay?" he asked softly, his eyes returning to the road. His mother turned to him, her smile gentle and warm, as always. "I'm fine, dear," she replied, her voice calm and reassuring. "Just another day, right?" Keanu chuckled softly, grateful for how grounded she always was. Despite everything that had happened, his mother never seemed to get rattled. She had an inner peace about her that he admired. "You handled that really well back there," he said, a touch of pride in his voice. She laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Oh, I didn't do anything special. I just stayed polite. It's important not to let other people's actions control your peace." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. He had always appreciated his mother's wisdom, and it had shaped the way he approached life. He had seen her handle countless situations with grace and patience, and it had never failed her. She never let negativity get to her, even when others around her might have been losing their cool. As they drove, Keanu reflected on the strange encounter at the gas station. He had recognized the bikers immediately, but he hadn't expected the situation to unfold the way it did. It had all started with harmless teasing, but quickly escalated into something much more awkward. Keanu could sense the shift in the bikers' demeanor when they realized who he was. He had seen it before: people who were so used to being bold and in control, suddenly quiet and respectful when faced with someone they admired. But it wasn't the fame that had changed the dynamic. It was the simple act of standing up for someone, of showing that respect was important, no matter who you were. Keanu had said just enough to make the point clear without escalating things further. He didn't believe in making a scene, but he also didn't believe in letting people get away with disrespect. He glanced over at his mother again, noting the peaceful calm she exuded. Even after all these years, she still had a way of handling life's challenges with a wisdom that always grounded him. His mother must have noticed his gaze because she turned to him with a soft smile. "It's all about balance, Keanu. You can't control how others behave, but you can control how you respond. That's where your true power lies." Keanu smiled, grateful for her steadying presence. It wasn't always easy to stay balanced, especially in a world that sometimes felt unpredictable. But with his mother's guidance, he had learned how to navigate those moments with patience and understanding. As they drove further along the road, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. They talked about their plans for the day, where they'd head next, and the little things that always made them smile. The bikers and their antics were already fading from Keanu's mind, replaced by the peaceful rhythm of the open road and the easy comfort of his mother's company. For Keanu, there was nothing more important than moments like this. Those simple, quiet moments that reminded him what truly mattered in life. And as they drove, he realized that no matter what happened, his mother's words would always stay with him, guiding him through every situation, no matter how big or small. The road stretched ahead, winding gently through the countryside, and the peaceful drive was exactly what Keanu and his mother needed after the brief but intense encounter at the gas station. The landscape outside was quiet and beautiful, with green fields and rolling hills that seemed to go on forever. The sunlight was soft, casting a warm glow on the world as they cruised along, the hum of the car's engine providing a comforting background sound. As they drove, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on what had happened at the gas station. It was a small incident in the grand scheme of things, but it had left a mark on him. He had always known that he and his mother lived a somewhat unusual life. Being in the public eye came with its own set of challenges, and people often didn't realize that celebrities were just regular people too. But today, it was different. It wasn't about fame or status. It was about the way people treated each other, no matter who they were. Keanu glanced over at his mother, who sat beside him with a peaceful look on her face. She was someone who had always taught him that kindness and respect were far more important than any of the things people might try to chase. Whether they were in the spotlight or not, it was the way you treated others that truly mattered. And today, when the bikers had made their remarks, she had handled the situation with grace, showing them that respect was something they should have offered from the start. "Do you ever get tired of the attention?" Keanu asked, breaking the quiet, his voice thoughtful. His mother smiled softly, her eyes still focused on the road ahead. "I think it's part of our lives, Keanu. But no, I don't get tired of it. It's just another piece of the puzzle. What matters is how we carry ourselves, no matter who's looking. Whether it's someone famous or someone just passing by, everyone deserves kindness and respect." Keanu nodded. He had heard his mother say similar things many times, but hearing her speak so calmly about it always made him feel reassured. She had this way of looking at the world that was simple but wise. It wasn't about the distractions or noise that surrounded them. It was about staying true to who they were inside. "I guess I was kind of surprised by how the bikers reacted," Keanu admitted, his brow furrowed slightly. It was like they didn't even realize how far they'd gone until it was pointed out to them. They were so focused on having fun at someone else's expense that they didn't stop to think about what it could mean for the other person. His mother gave a small laugh, nodding in understanding. Sometimes people don't realize the impact of their actions until it's too late. But that's why it's important to always be mindful. It's not about being perfect, but about being aware of the way we affect others. People can be so caught up in their own world that they forget there's a whole other person in front of them, with their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Keanu took in her words, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. His mother had a unique ability to put things into perspective. In a world that could sometimes feel overwhelming, her wisdom always seemed to ground him, reminding him of what was truly important. They continued to drive in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the road calming both of them. Keanu wasn't sure where their journey would take them next, but he knew that wherever they went, it would be okay. With his mother by his side, he felt ready for whatever came their way. It wasn't the events that mattered, it was the way they chose to face them. As they turned a corner, a small town came into view, its quiet streets and friendly shops offering a welcoming sight. Keanu smiled softly, knowing that whatever the rest of the day held, it would be another opportunity to share a moment with the person who had always guided him with love and wisdom. As they entered the small town, the peaceful atmosphere seemed to reflect the mood in the car. The streets were quiet, with just a few people strolling along, enjoying the calm of the afternoon. Keanu and his mother drove through the town slowly, taking in the familiar sights, the little cafes with outdoor seating, the small bookstore on the corner, and the old diner where they'd stopped for coffee in the past. There was something comforting about the simplicity of it all. It was a reminder that no matter how busy or complicated life might seem at times, there were still places in the world that stayed the same, where the pace of life was slower and people took the time to enjoy the little things. Keanu turned to his mother, who was still sitting peacefully beside him, looking out the window with a quiet smile. "I think I needed this," he said, his voice soft. "A break from all the noise, you know. It's easy to get caught up in everything going on around us, but sometimes you just need a moment to breathe." His mother nodded, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "We all do, Keanu. It's easy to forget that taking a moment to pause and appreciate the small things can help put everything back in perspective. Life can be overwhelming sometimes, but it's the simple moments that ground us." Keanu smiled, grateful for her wisdom. It was something he had always admired about her, her ability to find peace in the midst of chaos. While his life had often been filled with the demands of his career, his mother had always known how to slow down and appreciate the present moment. He often wished he could carry that same sense of calm with him more often. As they drove through the town, Keanu couldn't help but think about the bikers from earlier. The way they had acted before realizing who he was had been a reminder that sometimes people didn't always understand the impact of their actions. But it was also a reminder of how simple it could be to make things right with a few kind words and a little bit of understanding. He wasn't angry at them. In fact, part of him hoped they had learned something from the experience, about respect, about kindness, and about the way they treated others. He knew it wasn't about what they had done, but how they chose to move forward from it. His mother turned to him with a gentle smile. "You did the right thing today, Keanu," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Sometimes it's not about fighting back or making a big scene. It's about standing up for what's right, calmly and with respect. And you showed them that." Keanu smiled back at her, feeling a sense of pride. He wasn't used to thinking of himself as someone who could teach others anything, but his mother's words made him realize that sometimes, just by being himself, he could make a difference. The town came to a stop sign, and Keanu slowed the car. As they sat there, waiting for the light to change, he thought about everything that had happened that day. The bikers, the lesson learned, and the quiet drive through the countryside. It wasn't an eventful day by most standards, but it was one that had reminded him of what really mattered. It wasn't about fame, or attention, or recognition. It was about the way you treated others and the simple moments of connection that made life meaningful. When the light turned green, Keanu slowly pressed the gas pedal and continued driving through the town. It wasn't just the peacefulness of the town that felt comforting. It was the knowledge that, in the end, the most important thing was staying true to yourself and showing kindness to the people around you. No matter what had happened at the gas station earlier, it was a lesson that would stay with him for a long time. As they left the town behind, Keanu felt a quiet sense of contentment wash over him. Whatever came next, he knew that with his mother by his side, he could handle it. Life might throw its challenges at him, but with the right perspective, anything was possible.